Today's lecture will be over Chapter 1, Section 1. Objectives. Number 1, explain how geographers study the world. Number 2, define location and explain how geographers describe it. Number 3, explain the themes of place and region and identify the differences among formal, functional, and perceptual regions. Number 4, explain the geographic theme of human-environment interaction. And number 5, explain the theme of movement and distinguish among linear, time, and psychological distance. So the first thing that we're going to look at today is that we're going to look at what geography is. Historians have looked at events over time, but geographers, they're going to use space on Earth. They're also going to look at how we interact with space and also place, and we're going to look at patterns and connections between the people and land. We've got human geography and we've got physical geography. Human geography has to do with politics, it has to do with religion, it has to do with language, it has to do with customs. You're going to see geography is going to be encompassed of human geography, but it's also going to be encompassing physical geography. And physical geography is going to be when we study plants, we study animals, we study rocks, we study water. Geography is a distribution of how humans are going to go ahead and we're going to interact with that physical geography. So we really can't have one without the other, but we have to look at and really distinguish between the two and also use both of them. Geographers are going to use a variety of different tools. We're going to use maps. This is something that a lot of people think about when they think of geography. We're also going to use photographs. We're going to use charts, graphs, and tables. We also use it scale models, but the big thing that we look at, and the theme is something that's going to run really throughout the entire course, is going to be the 5 themes of geography. Now, the 5 themes of geography: location, place, interaction, movement, and region. We're actually going to go through each one of these 5 themes of geography, but when they come together, these are things that we can use throughout really the entire class and really throughout all of our studying. So the question first is that what's location? Well, there's 2 different types of location. We have absolute location and relative location. Absolute location is an exact place on the earth. So if I sit there and I say go to 36 degrees west, 115 degrees west, you're going to go ahead and you're going to be able to know exactly where to go. If I give you a street address, 645 Surrey Road, you're going to be able to go to that exact spot. So we use absolute location a lot, but we also use relative location. Relative location is a location of a place compared to the places around it. So what we might do is we might say, okay, go ahead and go to the southwest part of Lake Erie, or we could go and we could say go to east of the Mississippi River. Those are all relative locations because they're relative to something else. Again, we're going to use these in different ways, but when we talk about location, these are the 2 types. Also, when we talk about location, we talk about lines of latitude and lines of longitude. Latitude lines are imaginary lines that run parallel to the equator. Longitude lines are imaginary lines that go over the poles. So, what we see here is that this is going to go ahead and it's going to be a drawing of the earth right here. Well, what we have is we've got one big line that cuts right through here, and that's going to be the equator. We've also got a line that goes north and south that's going to be the prime meridian, and that goes through England. So any line of latitude is going to go ahead and it's going to be parallel to the equator. Again, the equator is this all-important line that cuts the globe directly in half. Now, when we look at lines of longitude, and if you look at a globe or you look at a map, what you'll see is that these lines are definitely not parallel. They bow out and then they bow in. They bow out and then they bow in. And again, they don't cross each other, but you kind of get the point here. And what we see with these lines then is that they're going to meet at the poles. If you think about Santa Claus going to the North Pole or the South Pole, this would be a pole, and then this would also be a pole there. So lines of longitude are going to go ahead and they're going to cross at the poles. Again, lines of latitude run east and west, they never cross. Lines of longitude run up and down, and they definitely cross. Now, The other thing about absolute location is that when we look at these, we're going to look at the hemisphere, equator, and prime meridian. Now, in this drawing right here, we went ahead and we already looked at lines of longitude, lines of latitude, prime meridian, and the equator. But we look at the prime meridian goes up and down. We look at the equator going east and west. And so what we see is we see distinct hemispheres right here. Where number 1 is, that would be in the western hemisphere, but it would also be in the northern hemisphere. Number 2 would be in the southern hemisphere and the western hemisphere. How do we know this? We're looking at the prime meridian and we're looking at the equator. If it's north of the equator, it's going to be in the northern hemisphere. If it's south of the equator, it's going to be in the southern hemisphere. If it's east of the prime meridian, it's in the eastern hemisphere, and of course if it's in the west of the prime meridian, it's in the western hemisphere. So the United States, we're going to go ahead and we're going to be in the northern hemisphere, and we're also going to be in the western hemisphere. Now, relative location is how a place is related to its surrounding environments. What we have to do is that we have to be able to know what those surrounding environments are. We might have to know what a lake is, we might have to know what a stream is or a gulf. And those things are going to be able to show us and kind of connect us what is relative and what is absolute. Now, the second theme of geography is going to be a place. Now, a place includes physical features and cultural features. A physical feature of an area might include its climate, landform, and vegetation, where cultural characteristics might include a dam, highways, or houses. So what we're talking about with a place is that we're looking how to describe it. If I was to ask to describe Fremont, what you might say is it's cold in the winter and hot during the summer. You might say it's relatively flat. Those are all going to be physical features. If I were to ask you what type of people live in Fremont, you might say that they're nice people. You might say that a large group of Caucasian Americans live here. Those are cultural characteristics. Now, the one thing to make sure that we understand about a place is that a place does not have to be unique. For example, talking about Fremont is a flat area. Is Fremont the only area in the entire world that's flat? No, it's not. But what it is that it just gives us an opportunity to be able to describe it. So when we talk about describing places, that's what we're doing. Now, we also have a region. A region is an area united by similar characteristics, unifying characteristics like physical, political, economical, or cultural. There are different types. There's formal, there's functional, and there's also perceptual. An example of a formal region is defined by a limited number of related characteristics. So, for example, the United States and Canada, these would be formal regions. Latin America, Europe, all of those that we list out here, those are going to be formal regions. Again, they have related characteristics that are all going to be common. They might be cultural characteristics, they might be physical characteristics, but we can go ahead and we can unite them. We also see a functional region, and a functional region is an organized around interactions and connections between places. So, for example, a functional region might be a suburb and a city. That suburb and the city are connected because people go back and forth. If you think of Omaha and you look at Elkhorn, where does Elkhorn start? Where does Omaha begin? It's very difficult to understand that, but what we do know is that when we start looking at things like police officers, or we start looking at hospitals, and we start looking at firemen, they don't care what part is going to be Omaha and what part is Elkhorn. They'll go ahead and cross lines because that's a functional region. A perceptual region is a region with characteristics that people kind of perceive in the same way. So, for example, of a perceptual region right here, we look at the American Midwest, and this is actually a drawing and kind of a plotted out graph in the New York Times, and they said which one of these is part of the Midwest. And what you're going to find is that most of the time it has to do with where people live at. So, for example, this area right here might be people from Nebraska because Nebraska is in the middle right here. But you look in the top right, some people would not even consider Nebraska to be part of the heartland. You're going to go ahead and you're going to see the Midwest people thinking that this probably would be somebody from Illinois, maybe somebody from Minnesota or Wisconsin or Michigan. In this area right here, you might see a scatter plot where it might be from multiple people. So what this shows right here is this shows that we ask, where is the heartland of America? Where is the Midwest? These maps here are showing people that basically we don't know. We don't know exactly where it's at. But what we say is that they are perceived in the same way. We know what America Midwest is, it's just hard for us to actually put it on a map. Now, the next theme in geography is human-environment interaction. This is a relationship exists between people and the environment. People use and change the environment to meet their needs. People adapt the environmental conditions that they cannot change. Often people in similar environments adapt in certain ways. So what we see with the human-environment interaction, very simple, is that we change the environment and the environment change people. For example, Americans might go ahead and they might build dams along the rivers to be, and really not just Nebraska or America, but anywhere, they might go ahead and they might have these all over the world, and these dams change the environment. They create lakes, they create streams, they might cool the environment. We have changed it. Humans change the environment. The environment can also change people. For example, you might see someone that is an Inuit Eskimo that lives in the northern region, and that over time they become heavier, they have more fat. They might be very healthy, but they might become very fat because they're eating their diet of seals and whales and things like that. It might be healthy, but they might also be gaining weight to help them with a colder environment. So again, we can go ahead and we can see that the humans can change the environment, but the environment can also change the people. Now, last but not least, the last theme of geography is going to be movement. And this is how do people, goods, and ideas get from one place to the other. What we do is that we analyze this. We look at linear distance, we look at time distance, and we look at psychological distance. On the bottom there, linear distance is how far a product, person, or idea travels. So for example, if we've gotten to the point where we completely lose modern technology, we don't have power or gasoline or anything like that. People need things like salt to preserve food, and so in the United States, would we live in the Midwest? Probably not. Where would we live to be able to get that salt? We would live probably down near the Gulf of Mexico, the East Coast, and the West Coast. So of course the question is that would we ever live in Nebraska and walk that way to get salt? Linear distance says it's too far, and so we're probably only going to use the things that are around us. We also have time distance, how long it takes for a person, product, or idea to travel. For example, if you're somebody that really likes lobster, if you had to walk all the way to Boston, Massachusetts, you're probably not going to go ahead and buy that. However, if you could go ahead and you could fly there, and you could fly there in a couple hours, now you're more than likely going to be able to buy that because the time changes. The actual distance between Omaha or Fremont, Nebraska and Boston, Massachusetts never changed. It was the time that it took to get there, that's what changed. And then last but not least is psychological distance, and this refers to the way people perceive a distance. So for example, if you sit there and you look at a busy highway and you say that right across the street you want to go to the gas station, but there's a major highway that you would have to get into your car and you would have to travel across there, you're probably not going to go to that gas station. However, you might be willing to drive a little bit out of your way if you think that it actually takes less time to get someplace. So again, what we do is that we say that we're probably not willing to go to unfamiliar places that we see far away. We're going to look at this when we start talking about Europe and we start talking about Transcaucasian. We say, okay, you're going to go ahead and you're going to go across Asia, Europe, go to the Mediterranean Sea. It's more difficult when people are not very familiar with that, and therefore they may not go. This is a completion of Chapter 1, Section 1 lecture. At this time, what you need to do is that you need to go ahead and you need to complete the assessments for Chapter 1, Section 1.